Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, from wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of Just Us. This is Khutso and Emily, and we're here to discuss topics that nobody's talking about. So, what do we have on the agenda today?
Well, we hope our topics unite the world, right?
Well, yes, of course.
Hey, there's our friend Fatima. Hello, Fatima. Fatima is streaming from South Africa. She's a good friend of mine here. Thanks for joining us. All right.
So,
sorry, Emily, I kind of digressed there because I was welcoming Fatima. So you asked, what are we talking about today?
I said, well, what do we got on the agenda today?
Are you your accent? That's what we're talking about today.
And I think I stemmed that one, given I tend to have this foreign English accent in a English-speaking country. And it made me think, how many accents are there out there? And I did look it up, and there are 160 dialects, English dialects. And apparently an accent is unique to every individual. So there will be millions of different accents, English accents out there.
Yeah.
But we titled this, Are You Your Accent? Because of that notion that when you speak and the accent that you portray potentially causes judgment or placement of who you are and where you're from and what you're about. And I thought to myself, is that really true? And how do these preconceptions come about? So starting with my accent, here in New Zealand, obviously I have an American accent. And even though I've lived here for 17 years, as soon as I open my mouth, there's all of a sudden the preconception that potentially I'm a foreigner or that, I'm a tourist. And so I sometimes struggle with that because I don't want to change my accent to fit in, but I know some people might take that approach. And that leads me to another point of which we were discussing earlier this week is, when do you form your accent? Because another question that I've always gotten is, why do you have an American accent if you grew up in Africa most of your life? And that stemmed to think about my own children and what accent they might have, because they have a Kiwi father and American mother, and they move around the world a bit. So I'm curious, what their accent might be. And again, they might have one of those unique accents that nobody else has. But I think that your accent is really defined during your maybe 6-7-year-old period, when you're 6 or 7 years old. And I'm sure there's a science around this, and also what you're exposed to, what your parents' accent are, and what you predominantly hear. And perhaps if your parents don't speak English and you're hearing an English accent, if we're talking about the English accent, you hear an English accent in the country that you're living in, that's the accent that you'll pick up. But if your parents do speak English, maybe you'll pick up the accent that your parents speak, because that's what you're hearing more of that particular accent. So in my childhood, of course, both my parents are American, so that's the accent that I picked up during my childhood.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to ask you about your experience.
Yeah, mine is very different. In that, when I was growing up, my household, we predominantly spoke Spedi. That's that's the language, one of the languages in South Africa. And then you learned English in school. And then I left the country. I find, relating to your first point that you mentioned, wherever I go, I pick up the accent. I think. Right. In South Africa, a lot of people question my accent because I don't sound like your average South African, typically, actually, at all. So I have a similar experience to you in that everywhere I go, whenever I open my mouth, everybody's like, huh? Come again? Especially because I have a very local looking name. Outside South Africa, nobody knows what Khutso means, and both my last names, I kept my family name and my husband's. they're both very local. People look at me, they think South African, but when they speak to me, they get confused. And especially on the phone, they don't expect that this is me. And even when I say I'm Khutso, they're like, really? Like you mean like the one we know? Like I'm like, yeah.
The one you know from
So
Just Us?
I'm sorry.
The one you know from Just Us?
Yeah, the one. Hey, might as well project straight into the future. But I found, even when I was living in Thailand, I picked up some of the phrases there. For me, it's a question of pragmatics. I get sick and tired of having to repeat myself. I mean, by the time I got done living in Australia, New Zealand, wherever I lived, I found by the time I left, because I actually lived there for no less than 6 months at a time, right? By the time I left, I had picked up a lot of the accent, and I know you have a different philosophy about it. For me, it was just, I got really sick and tired of having to repeat myself every time. It's like, say, why is that a tomato or tomato? Sort of thing. I was like, okay, which country am I in again? What's the better way to say this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
yeah,
so we
for
just
you, it's a lot about identity, isn't it? You
well,
feel like you wanna you don't want to have to change your act. I don't feel like I have to. I just do it out of choice because I
well, I
just
think
pick up the
yeah.
colloquialisms and the way people say things, so that I don't have to repeat myself so much.
Well, I think that's it. I spent most of my life, and I think it's normal. You adapt your accent to where you are, so you can be better understood, and so you don't stick out. And I think this stemmed from where I some people do that to more extremes than others, and perhaps that's your ability to do that, or it's your desire to do that. But I think I came to a point in my life where I just didn't want to change. I think naturally your accent changes to where you are to some degree.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to have to deliberately change my accent so that I
Uh-huh.
fit in.
Right. Right.
Obviously, if you can't be understood, you're going to make an effort to be understood. But
Mm-hmm.
but I spent most of my life overseas changing my accent. And admittedly, I still people here think I'm Canadian. Hopefully, that's not offensive to any Canadians out there. Um,
You know what? Maybe because I know you so well, and I've lived with, I've been with you. We've traveled the world together. But I can pick out the Kiwi in your accent. I mean, I can hear predominantly American, but I can pick out the Kiwi a lot also.
right. And
So,
that's when exactly when you're somewhere you pick up where you are, that tone somewhat more. The other thing we were discussing that I thought was fascinating was just around regional accents, and I was revealing the story of, as a child, my family's originally from the south of the US, and obviously the South has a very strong accent. And how, coming back to that point of judgment, you hear an accent, and I remember that it was so unfamiliar to me that I kind of disconnected myself from the South because of the accent. And then over time realized that didn't matter so much, and it's a matter of adjusting. And so yeah, I think this ties back into our original identity, when we were talking about who we are and how we're perceived based on what we were talking about race at the time, but even accent gives a portrayal of a person. And so are you really your accent, or is there more to you? So if I speak and I have an American accent, nobody knows that I grew up in 5 different countries, and that my background is very international, and that I use British English every time I write. So I think that's what makes it fascinating, is our preconceptions that are associated with accents.
yeah, accents are, your next closest thing to skin color, I guess, in terms of people's ability to stereotype you. And by the way, I'm giving a shout out to my brother. My younger brother is streaming on. Wow, we're having quite a bit of company. I'm cheating, Emily. It's like 9 o'clock in South Africa. So
It's
So
prom time.
African folks are awake. Yes. So
Well,
I got my
it's
girl Fatima, and I got my
oh,
brother.
it's and it's
So
morning time, so it's
yeah,
8:30
I,
our time.
yeah. Your folks have probably fallen asleep. What time is it in the U.S. right now? We didn't even do
It
that calculation.
well, that is
It's in the middle of
middle
the
of the
night,
night,
right?
yeah.
That's why
So
we.
we
That's why.
if they're listening now, then we're on good terms with that fan. Really, we have some solid hardcore fans if they've turned on our episode right now.
Yes, if our U.S. friends would wake up in the middle of the night, we'd be like, "Whoa, these people mean business, right?" But we're
So
so appreciative. Thank you. I love my daddy, and he's watching with my two
aw,
nieces. Oh, sweet.
hi.
Okay.
So
Hey guys.
so
Cisco, shout out to Sis Katli and Sis Tumisho. Sorry, you can tell I'm very distracted with family and friends today.
I
Feeling the super love.
so I think you had a very
It sounds like
interesting
an
story.
accent. Sorry, go
Hi.
ahead. Sorry.
You had
I
a very
interrupted.
interesting story. I think you had your caffeine this morning.
I I'm still on my shot. I'm still on my shot.
I could just feel
The
that
world
energy
just bear
today.
with
You
me.
know? Usually we're in the opposite, and I have my caffeine
I
injection. I'm ready
know.
to go, and you're just like, "Hey, do we
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
do this now?"
Right, right.
So
Anyhow, where were we? We were talking about
we,
accent.
we
Are you real accent?
so I think I brought an interesting question. You told me an interesting story about your children. So just talking about my children, like I said, they have a Kiwi father and American mother, and where their accent falls will be interesting. I have this preconceived idea that my youngest will have an American accent and my oldest will have a Kiwi accent. And actually, today in the car, in Kiwi English, you drop all your R's. And of course, I'm from the South. We roll our R's. Okay. I've
Right,
even had
right.
people here think I'm Irish. And so I just wish I could remember the word my daughter was saying in the car, but I just said, put that R back in there, girl. We don't drop our R.
Oh my gosh, I know what you mean. Isn't it funny? And there are a couple of things I think we should
Oh,
discuss, which would be
it was
interesting.
girl. I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry because my
Go
daughter
ahead.
was saying Gil. She says, are you a Gil or a boy? Are you a Gil? And I said, what is a Gil? That's the thing fish have. Put that R back in there, girl. It's
Can we
girl.
can we talk properly, please? I do that with my kids all the time also. I'm just like, oh no. You can't be sounding like that now. We don't talk like that, you know. And truth of the matter is they're themselves. They have their own experiences. I'm always shocked because I lived so much around the world. I'm always shocked because my kids, my older boy, I mean, all three of them have spent pretty much all their lives at this point in South Africa. And that's the only reality they know. My little one was born in the US, but he was so young when we moved here. And so I'm always shocked at the people they're becoming because they're so different than my idea of what they, what a kid that is mine might sound like or do. Uh, it's not a bad thing. I'm just shocked. And kids are wonderful in that they adapt. I mean, they sound a lot like their friends that they play with. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a shock to me when they do things like that. The way they say some things, and you're just like, where did that even come from? You've never heard that from me because I didn't even know that thing exists. But I'm constantly saying, okay, can we speak properly, please? I mean, really now. What
So
the hell?
on that note, is it a Southern Hemisphere trend? Because Australia drops the R's, Kiwis drop their R's. Do South Africans drop their R's? Are they?
It totally depends. It totally depends on your native language and where you went to school. There are a whole lot of things. But, I don't even think that that the South African accent is so diverse, I say.
Hmm.
You have, if you're a Zulu speaker, that is one of the African ethnic groups, you sound slightly different than a Sotho speaker, even when you speak English. And these are all brown skinned people, right? And if you're of European descent, you even sound way more different. Like if you hear the way my husband speaks, he's
Hmm.
Afrikaans, it's more the European descent. it sounds very different than the way my brother, who's streaming on here now, sounds, right? Because
Right.
they're both South African accents, but they're different South African accents. It's quite the spectrum because we have 11 national languages here, and each language has an effect on how you'll speak your English.
Right, right. Yeah,
So
that's really interesting. And that goes if you learn, English as a second language, obviously your
yeah,
native language influences your accent. And
yeah.
yeah, and I think really this episode was nicely titled, Are You Your Accent? Because, have you ever sat down to think about your accent and how much it represents you or doesn't? And what your history is? You really can tell a story just from how you derived your accent about yourself. It,
Mm,
and so yeah, I think it's more we just take it for granted, and it's more fascinating than than we realize. So I think everyone out there should think about their accent, and really it would be great if someone would share with us their perception of their own accent and how it is perceived uh, externally as well.
mm.
um,
Actually, I'm gonna ask my niece. I got a couple of nieces on here now. Now, Siska and Sister Tumisho, tell me, are you guys still there? I don't know if you guys can hear me, but what do you think of the way you guys speak English? Do you like your accents? Do you think, actually, I don't know who's still on. We have one person on. I'm not sure who that is. If that's my
and
somebody else. Anyone.
and
Anyway, it'll be interesting.
And talking about do you like your accent, I remember when I used to agonize over what accent my children would have because I didn't want them to have an American accent and I didn't want them to have a Kiwi accent. I wanted them to have that perfect neutral accent that some of my friends growing up had, that were European, typically European or African, growing up in the international school, and they just developed this beautiful neutral accent. And so that was my dream for my children. But there's some dreams you have to let go of.
Yeah.
You
But you
gotta
know what?
prioritize the importance of your children's attributes.
And truly, your children are going to have their own experiences. I mean, you and I, we've created our own realities. We're where we are. They have yet to create their own lives. And they're going to end up sounding deliberately or not like themselves, right? Right now, you're just like, okay, under my roof. I wish we would speak differently, but it's just who they are. It's very humbling to know that even though they came through you, they are themselves. You know,
Right.
it
Yeah.
it's I hear what you mean because I as I said, I struggle with that also. I'm like, oh, really, this is what they sound like. But how does it make you feel, Emily, to be picked out as an American, say in
Well,
New Zealand or wherever you go?
I think that that's you don't notice that you speak differently when you speak to someone. Just like we were talking about race, you don't sit there and think as you're talking to someone, well, I look like this or you look like that. Um, and I think being here for 17 years, I'm an immigrant, and I feel like an immigrant when I have to go somewhere every time and always explain myself. I get the same question. Well, how long have you been here? And you get that preconceived, well, you know nothing about New Zealand. And so I can really relate to being an immigrant from any country to another country, because I think you're always somewhat of an outsider simply because you speak differently, or you might have a slightly different culture. And normally it won't bother you, but times you kind of you want to move on from that. And
Hmm,
one
hmm.
way you can do it is really adjust your accent as much as you can. But then that sparks another conversation where are you from? Your accent is interesting. I
Hmm.
don't think you can get away from it unless you
Yeah.
sound just like the other person.
Right. Yeah. No, as I said, I get that a lot here. I actually get it everywhere. There's not, even in the US, South Africans think I sound American. Americans think I sound different. I'm good with either or. I call it my own. I'm Khutso. What are you gonna do? That's me, and
Yeah.
I'm fine. I'm really quite fine with the way I speak and where I come from. But I've had to learn that speaking a certain way in this country, especially, predisposes you to certain notions. That's why I asked how you feel about it. When I first moved to South Africa, moved in 2012. I had some family and friends tell me, with your accent, you can get away with murder because it's so cool to have an American accent or whatever, for people to think you're American or whatever. And maybe that may be the case. I don't know. But I know that I truly, because here's the thing, that reverse culture shock thing that
Mm.
expats or people who live outside their countries experience. Whenever I feel extreme versions of it, I just lapse into, listen, I'm a foreigner, so forgive me for disagreeing and behaving in ways you don't like. That's when I absolutely, and I confess, that's when I just speak to, I just stick to English and just layer it. Because here is the thing. When my brother says my niece says my accent sounds American. Because here's the thing, and I don't know how you feel, because but in South Africa, people look at you. Your skin color dictates how, even the language people address you in public, right? People look at you, they're like, oh, brown skin, oh, okay, therefore you're one of the local languages they'll choose to address you as such. And with that also comes expectations on behavior, right? You're supposed to do this, you're supposed that, all these subtleties around protocol, what you do in public. And some of it, especially pre-COVID, some of it is like, oh, whatever. I just want to be me, right? And so when I really want to be me, I just let it hang. I don't even try to fit in. I don't go around trying to greet everybody in the local languages. I just speak in English, and guess what? People forgive me because they think I'm foreign. And I guess I am foreign to some extent because I'm not your average South African. And it's okay. I'm just like, you know what? It's okay. I'm perfectly fine to be considered a foreigner, because I don't think I can stand the boxes of behavioral expectations that I therefore have to tick. Because then there are issues with my kids. Okay, well, if you're local and brown, why do your kids look that way? They don't look like you. And that's a whole other thing. Listen, accent helps. Sometimes I just open my mouth and speak in English, and I think this is probably what getting away with murder means. Because people, you open your mouth, people then assume or they just decide, okay, she's not from here, and therefore all her transgressions are forgiven, including having children that are kind of crazy looking compared to her. But yes, your accent, seriously, it's the next best. We do that. I do that too. I go out to a public place and I hear like an American accent or I hear an Italian accent. I'll actually comment on it. I'm like, oh, you sound like you're Italian, or you sound like you're Nigerian, or you sound like. But I always mean it well, because I think expats rule. I love expats. I think expats are a different breed of animal. If you can leave the comfort of your home and go settle in a new country, that makes you a spectacular human being, because your level of resilience and your sense of adventure is through the roof, if you ask me, and it means you have this ability to look at the world in a really unique sort of way. It's not everybody's this way, and we all have to be this way. You have a more expansive and accommodative way of looking at the world, which I think all of us need. I mean, this is 2020, right? Anyway, that's accent. It does.
I think we landed in the same place where you just be you. And, sometimes that's what you want to do. Sometimes you want to accommodate and fit in and just make life easier. Sometimes you just want to be you and just say it how it is, use the accent that comes out naturally. So, yeah, there's our conclusion. I'm worried we might get kicked off this thing. I don't know what our time limit is, but I know we can
Well,
talk
we
forever.
need to wrap it up. We need to wrap it up. Yeah, yeah.
So,
Anyway, I guess for better or worse, and let me tell you, I know that people who have it far worse, with their accents,
oh, for
I talked
sure.
about how I take advantage of my, pseudo American accent, American sounding accent, because it's looked at favorably where I currently live. And I know plenty of people, if you have a thick, like, I don't know, Nigerian accent or something in South Africa, people don't think you're all that cool. So well, just like skin color, these are the boxes we put each other in.
Right, right.
And we really ought to stop that.
No more boxes. I think our team needs to now be round because
Yes.
as we sit
Okay.
here in these two boxes.
We should keep going. Oh gosh, they really are going to kick us out. Well, Emily, any wrapping final thoughts? I wanted to slide in the downside of it also, that where I am fortunate, you're fortunate, that our accents don't really get us in trouble.
I don't know.
But
Over
there are
here, I
people who
don't
do.
know if it's so handy to have an American accent.
Well, yeah, but
I'm going to start practicing my British accent. I think that's the conclusion.
yeah. And now, this is a good lesson for the world to know that it's not always cool. Well, actually, I know Americans do. I mean, there are certain places where you don't want to be seen as American. You don't want to go to the Middle East and put on your thick
Actually,
American
you
accent.
know, sorry to drag this on, but here in New Zealand, since American television came on board, more of the kids have more of an American accent than the adults do. It's quite fascinating, the influence of television on the accents to the next
Oh
generation.
man. Oh
Yeah,
yeah. That whole thing you talked about, when accents get formed, that it screws with that. I mean,
yeah,
because now they hear it on TV, and they
yeah,
sound a lot like that too. Kids
yeah.
are amazing. They're really, I mean, they're
They're
fascinating.
so adaptable. They're so
Yeah,
adaptable.
totally. Yeah. Okay, we really ought to go now. World, thank you for
Thank you for,
tuning in.
and looking forward to next time. To be
Yeah, and don't
determined.
to be determined. Next time we'll be smack in the middle of Christmas holidays or something, or we'll be closer to that next week. So,
Week before Christmas. Week before Christmas.
okay. See, I'm still on
So
some other time. Yeah.
it will
All
be a
right.
holiday. It will be a holiday episode. It will be a holiday episode.
Awesome.
And before my
Yes.
child's
We'll
head
do
gets
it.
in the
We'll keep
screen,
it like.
we should say to
Okay.
ta-ta.
Subscribe. Okay. Thanks
Adios.
for tuning in, everybody. Thanks, Aluma Daddy. Thanks, Fatima. And thanks, everybody who's going to watch this later. And don't forget to subscribe. Bye-bye. Bye, Emily. Bye,
Bye.
Sabine.
Bye.
All right.